Lesley Whittle, 1975, Shropshire. Her brother was feet away and never knew. Every town has a place that looks ordinary until the truth changes it forever. A road people drive without thinking, a house behind a garden wall, a public park where children play and families walk on quiet afternoons. Most of the time, these places keep their secrets well, because nothing about them seems dangerous from the outside. But in January of 1975, a young woman from Shropshire was taken from her own bedroom, driven across county lines, and hidden beneath the ground in a place no one thought to look soon enough. Her name was Lesley Ann Whittle, and to the newspapers she would soon become known as a teenage heiress. That word made the case sound like a story about wealth, ransom, and greed. But before the headlines, Lesley was a 17-year-old college student with ordinary routines, quiet ambitions, and a family who expected to see her come downstairs for breakfast. She had classes to attend, a boyfriend she cared about, and a future that had not yet had the chance to begin. Then, before dawn, on a cold Tuesday morning, she vanished from her own home in Highley, Shropshire. At first, the scene inside the house seemed almost impossible to understand. Lesley's clothes were still there. Her bed had been slept in. Her mother had checked on her only hours earlier and believed she was safe. But the telephone line had been cut, and inside the house someone had left a set of typed ransom messages demanding £50,000. The family was told not to contact the police. The implication was clear. Lesley had been taken alive, and whoever had taken her believed the Whittle family could pay. To understand why Lesley became a target, investigators had to look beyond the night she disappeared and back into her family's public history. Her father, George Whittle, had built a successful coach business in the Midlands after starting his working life as a bus driver. By the time Lesley was a teenager, the family was well known locally, and they lived at Beechcroft, a large detached home in the village of Highley. George had died in September of 1970, and afterward, details about his estate became public during a family dispute. Those reports placed private financial information into the open. That publicity mattered more than anyone could have known at the time. A man named Donald Neilson read about the Whittle family and began forming a plan. Neilson was not a stranger to violence. He was a former soldier, a burglar, and an armed robber who had already escalated into murder. By 1975, he had killed 3 sub-postmasters during armed robberies. The press called him the Black Panther because he wore dark clothing and a balaclava, and because witnesses described his movements as quick and controlled. But before police connected him to Lesley, he was still an unidentified predator operating ahead of the investigation. Neilson did not choose the Whittle family on impulse. According to later evidence, he had studied them for a long time and entered Beechcroft at night before the kidnapping to learn the layout. His original plan appears to have focused on taking Lesley's brother Ronald or her mother Dorothy. But careful plans can shift inside a house at night, especially when the person carrying them is armed and desperate for money. On the morning of January 14, 1975, Neilson moved from planning into action. Dorothy Whittle returned home from a social visit in the early hours and looked in on Lesley at about 1:45 in the morning. Lesley was asleep in her bedroom. Dorothy then took sleeping tablets and went to bed. For a short while, the house returned to silence. Outside, Neilson cut the telephone line before entering through the garage. Inside, he left a box of Turkish Delight with Dymo tape ransom messages attached or placed with it, then went upstairs to where Lesley was sleeping. Lesley woke to a gun pointed at her. Neilson gagged her and allowed her only a dressing gown and slippers before taking her out of the house. He placed her in a stolen green Morris, bound her wrists and ankles, blindfolded her, and hid her beneath a foam mattress on the back seat. By the time Dorothy woke later that morning, Lesley was no longer in Highley. She was being driven roughly 65 miles away to Kidsgrove, Staffordshire, toward a place that would become central to one of Britain's most disturbing criminal investigations. The destination was Bathpool Park, a public recreation area with old underground features connected to former industrial workings. Neilson had found a drainage and ventilation shaft there and decided it would serve as his hiding place. He forced Lesley down an iron ladder and into the cold underground space. At a platform roughly 54 feet below the surface, he placed her on a narrow ledge. She was hooded, and a wire noose was fastened around her neck, tethering her to the shaft. Neilson left items that suggested he expected her to remain there while the ransom was collected. There was a mattress, a sleeping bag, a torch, and other supplies reported in different accounts. But none of that made the place survivable in any humane sense. Lesley was underground, isolated, and restrained by her neck in darkness. Above her, the park looked ordinary. Nearby roads still carried traffic. People could pass through the area without knowing that a teenager was hidden beneath them. Back at Beechcroft, Dorothy discovered Lesley missing at around 10 minutes to 7 that morning. The clothes Lesley planned to wear to college were still in her room, which made it clear she had not left by choice for her usual routine. Dorothy tried the telephone, but it was dead. She went to Ronald Whittle's home, and when the family returned to Beechcroft together, they found the ransom messages. The demand was £50,000. The instructions told the family to wait for contact at a public phone box. Ronald contacted police despite the warning. It was a decision forced by an impossible situation. If the family obeyed the kidnapper completely, they would be alone against an armed murderer. If they involved the authorities, they risked provoking the person holding Lesley. West Mercia Police took charge, and Scotland Yard officers with kidnapping experience were brought in. The plan was to follow Neilson's instructions while hiding police involvement from him. But almost from the beginning, the operation was damaged by something no family could control. The story leaked to the press before the first ransom contact was completed. Reporters learned that a teenage girl had been abducted from a wealthy family, and the case quickly reached national attention. For Neilson, who was monitoring the situation, the pressure around the crime changed. The family waited as instructed, but the presence of media and the fear that the operation had been compromised caused police to withdraw Ronald from the phone box before Neilson finally called. When the call came, no one from the family was there to answer. What happened next tightened the trap around Lesley. Neilson returned to Bathpool Park and forced her to record a message for her family. The recording was designed to prove she was alive and to pressure the Whittles into paying. When Ronald later heard his sister's voice, the ransom demand became more than a written threat. Lesley was somewhere, and for a short time there was still hope she could be found alive. But the instructions Neilson created were complicated, and the location he chose was unfamiliar to the people trying to reach it. On the night of January 16th, Neilson made contact again and directed Ronald to a phone box in Kidsgrove. Hidden behind the backboard was another dymo-tape message with instructions leading toward Bathpool Park. Ronald left with the ransom money while police followed at a distance in unmarked cars. He was under pressure, driving in the dark, trying to follow a kidnapper's directions in an area he did not know. He got lost more than once before reaching the next stage of the route. When Ronald reached Bathpool Park, he was supposed to flash his headlights and look for a torch signal. He entered the area, but he missed the exact place Neilson intended. He drove around, flashed his lights, shouted, and searched in confusion. The most painful detail is how close he came. Lesley was in the shaft nearby, but the people trying to save her did not know the exact spot. She was beneath the ground, hidden from view, while her brother was above, carrying the ransom that was meant to bring her home. Other events made the scene even more chaotic. A courting couple was parked near the area, and a Staffordshire police car appeared nearby, unaware of the secret ransom operation. Neilson likely interpreted the situation as evidence of police interference. The exchange failed. Ronald left without delivering the money, and after that night, no confirmed contact from Lesley ever came again. The question that has haunted the case ever since is whether she was already dead soon afterward, or whether she remained alive underground for some unknown period of time. A major breakthrough came on January 23rd when police found the stolen green Morris near Dudley. Inside were items connected to the kidnapping, including a cassette recorder containing Lesley's voice, route instructions, dymo-tape messages, plastic sheeting, a torch, and a foam mattress. Hair found in the car matched samples taken from Lesley's hairbrush. Ballistics and other evidence also connected Neilson to the wider series of Black Panther crimes, including the shooting of security guard Gerald Smith during the ransom trail. The car told investigators that Lesley had been inside it, but it did not tell them where she was. Police searched, appealed for information, and followed leads, while the Whittle family remained trapped between grief and uncertainty. Then, in early March, items found by members of the public drew attention back to Bathpool Park. Schoolboys had discovered a torch and a strip of red dymo tape connected to the ransom instructions. Those discoveries pushed police toward a more thorough search of the park's underground shafts. On March 6th, officers began searching the area again with dogs and mine rescue support. They found more dymo tape, a dymo tape machine, a spanner, a jacket, and binoculars. The search moved toward the deeper shaft, but safety concerns meant the most difficult inspection had to wait. The next morning, on March 7, 1975, police and mine rescue personnel descended into the shaft that Neilson had used as Lesley's prison. Below the surface, they found the place where she had been held. There was bedding and other material on the platform. Then they found Lesley's body. She had been dead for weeks. The official cause of death was vagal inhibition, a sudden fatal reflex associated with pressure around the neck and extreme distress. The pathologist could not place the exact time of death with complete certainty, but the condition of her body showed she had not survived long enough for rescue. Neilson later claimed that Lesley had fallen accidentally while he was moving near her on the ledge. The prosecution argued that he may have pushed her after the failed ransom delivery. Another possibility discussed in the case was that he fled in panic, leaving her alive for a time until she fell or died in the shaft. The exact final sequence remains unresolved, but the known facts are enough. Lesley was taken from her bedroom, restrained underground, and left in conditions that led to her death. For months after Lesley was found, Donald Neilson remained free. He returned to crime, and the manhunt continued across police forces. Then, on December 11, 1975, two police officers saw a suspicious man near a post office in Mansfield. When they questioned him, he gave a false name. Moments later, he pulled a sawn-off shotgun and forced the officers into a car. During the struggle that followed near a fish and chip shop in Rainworth, the officers fought back with help from members of the public, and Neilson was overpowered. At first, he refused to give his real identity, but fingerprints linked him to evidence from the shaft where Lesley had been held. Police then searched his home in Bradford and found weapons, equipment, maps, tape, rope, and other materials consistent with his crimes. Neilson eventually admitted kidnapping Lesley, but he continued to describe her death as accidental. The legal question was whether the court would accept that version of events after everything that had been done to her. His trial at Oxford Crown Court began in June of 1976. Neilson pleaded guilty to kidnapping and attempting to extort money, but not guilty to murdering Lesley. The jury convicted him. He was also convicted for the murders of 3 sub-postmasters. The court handed him multiple life sentences, and decades later, a judge ruled that he should never be released. Donald Neilson died in prison in December of 2011. The case did not end with his conviction because some parts of Lesley's final hours remain unknowable. Investigators could reconstruct the abduction, the ransom route, the car, the shaft, and the evidence that tied Neilson to the crime. They could prove that he targeted the Whittle family after learning about their money, and they could prove that he placed Lesley in an underground prison while demanding payment. But no one can fully know what she experienced in that darkness after the failed ransom attempt, or exactly how close rescue came before the chance was lost. Lesley Whittle is often remembered through the scale of the case, the ransom demand, the national headlines, the Black Panther manhunt, and the shocking discovery at Bathpool Park. But those details should not overshadow who she was before January of 1975. She was a student, a daughter, a sister, and a young woman with ordinary hopes. Her life was not defined by the fortune others spoke about. It was ended by a man who saw that public information as a reason to target her. That is why the case still carries such weight. It began inside a family home, crossed into a hidden underground space, and exposed the terrible gap between knowing someone has been taken and knowing where to find them. Lesley was close enough to be missed, close enough for her brother to pass near her with the ransom, but still hidden beyond reach. By the time police finally descended into the shaft and found the truth, the story had already become a reminder that evil does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it studies a house, waits for darkness, cuts a phone line, and leaves a family searching for someone who is only a few feet from the world above.